Hello everyone. Thank you for coming for this Digital Humanities Hangout. We are very pleased to have you here. And we will have a presentation from Eric Brasil, who is a professor at the Institute of Humanities and Languages at the University for the International Integration of Afro-Brazilian Lusophony in Bahia, Brazil. And Eric is also the managing editor of the program historian in Portuguese and a researcher at the Digital Humanities Lab at the Federal University of Bahia. From 2022 to 2023, he was also a visiting researcher at the Digital Humanities Lab in the Institute of Contemporary History, and we were very pleased to have you there for a couple of months with us. So Eric is going to talk to us about HemDig PT, a framework for collecting, organizing, and processing digitized newspaper pages in Portuguese. And thank you very much, Eric, once again.
Thank you, Joanna. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great honor to present this research for the first time after I finished my postdoctoral research with you in Lisbon. So for me, it's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about this research for the first time. And I hope I can present you all my inspirations to this research and some key points that I hope that can present to you today. So I will try to read my notes to stay on time, because if I talk too loosely, maybe I'll talk too much. So I hope my English is comprehensible and we can debate after my presentation. So first of all, thank for the introduction, because now I'm here in Bahia, Brazil, and I'm working since 2018. 2018, I started to work with digital history, mainly debating on a digitized newspaper in Brazil from the National Library. So since 2018, I have been publishing some papers and conducting some research about digital newspapers in Brazil. So this research, as Joanna already told, it's called HemDig. I don't know how to pronounce in English, because the first part of the name comes from the name of digital libraries, digital newspaper library in Brazil, because newspaper libraries in Portuguese, it's called hemeroteca, which I think it's a very beautiful word, hemeroteca. And then in Portuguese, we call hemeroteca digital in Portuguese to talk about this digitized newspaper. So the name of the framework is based on this beautiful Portuguese word that is hemeroteca. And the idea was to elaborate a framework for collecting and organizing these digitized newspapers in Portuguese. So just me come back to my notes here. This framework I developed to handle this digitized newspaper, and the idea here is to provide a summary of what was done, the challenges faced, and some results that I achieved in this research. Because now I'm starting to write some journal articles to publish the results on this research, right? So my main motivation, is that the historical newspapers, talking about Brazil, but I think it's the same issue in Portugal and all around the world. But specifically in Brazil in recent years, I have observed the growing use of these sources, digitized newspapers, especially with the popularization of the Brazilian Digital Newspaper Library, which is a project of the National Library of Brazil. And this digital newspaper library was launched in 2012. So now we have more than a decade of this its graphical interface to search millions and millions of pages of digital newspaper have been used in many research now. So I have received many journal articles, theses, dissertations, papers that uses this repository of digital newspaper as the main source for the research. But at the same time, there is a methodological silence about its use, how the research is conducted, what methods are used for processing these digital objects, and moreover, how such issues has epistemological impact in this research. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I have been doing these questions and trying to answer it. So this HemDig PT is an attempt to systemize some of these reflections and collaborate with researchers who deal with digitized newspapers, mainly in Portuguese, but I guess these reflections are important for all historians who deal with this kind of source. And one of the main challenges for me and for other historians who use this kind of digital data is that we have now a large volume of digital newspapers, and with a variety of formats and a variety of quality of these digitizations. So it's a huge challenge to face not only the characteristics of these collections, but also the problems related with the graphical user interface of these repositories, how you can search in these web pages and how the results are returned to the researcher. So, and there's another important gap is that we have a few debates in Portuguese about these issues, especially about the epistemological impact of the use of these kind of graphical interfaces to search digital newspapers. And we have few models trained for OCR in Portuguese as well. Another question for me was if these problems was the same for others repositories in other languages like English, Spanish, and French, and so on. So the main objective here was to develop a comprehensive framework for efficient data collection and processing of digitized newspapers in Portuguese. And I will talk very briefly about these points here because all of these are documented in the framework repository. But as Joanna told, it was a part of my postdoctoral research in Lisbon. And it's based as well in my recent experience of working with newspaper libraries, digital newspapers library in Brazil. And all the research was versioning, used Git as the main software to control versions of all the changes that I made through all this year of research. And all of it is hosted in GitHub, and everything is documented. And the final product was published as a Jupyter book. And I will show you at the end, so you can now access it and have access to the code, to the history of the changes using Git, and the visualizations, the data, all of it is available under a Creative Commons license for non-commercial use. So all of it you can access in the GitHub, and now it's published as a Jupyter book in the web, and you can run the code. All the code I used, you can run using Binder or other platform like that. I will show this little later. So I created a 5-phase framework trying to comprehend all the needed steps to do a research using digital newspapers. And I will present each of these 5 phases very briefly, highlighting the objectives and the characteristics of each one. And the goal is to provide an overview of the framework and point out some of the results obtained during the research. So the first phase is planning and preparation. Second one is critique of collections. Third is data collection, then data processing. And the final one is review, preservation, and publication. I create some diagrams for the phases and specific diagrams for each phase. So here's an example of this diagram of all these phases, but it's in Portuguese. But here we can find the 5 phases. And I will go through all the 5 phases now. And the first one, planning and preparation. The first phase consists of methodological and technical planning and preparation. This phase introduces a set of tools and strategies to develop basic knowledge and resources, ensuring subsequent phases are executed more efficiently and accurately. So here I will show you these 3 parts that are part of this phase 1. And here we have the links for each of these topics. So first, it is a literature review that I present the Zotero software, which is famous one to managing references. And I present some tutorials and some explanations about how to use Zotero as a tool for managing bibliographic references. And then I did a bibliographic survey about topics related to digitized newspapers in 2 databases, Scopus and Web of Science. And as a result, I create a collection in a Zotero public library called Digital History, and there we have a collection specific with this literature review tagged with the main topics and some explanation of this literature review on layout recognition, optical character recognition, and some methodological and epistemological debates on the use of this kind of source. And then I listed the second topic here, basic technical preparation. I presented some programming historian lessons to help the researcher to organize the research. So I divided in basic computational knowledge, data management, and writing and publication and publishing. So the second topic here, I listed these programming historian lessons that I think it's important to the researcher understand before start to access the data in the collections and before start to dealing directly with the sources. That's called basic training preparation. And the third topic is research planning. So basically, I debate here some data management plan, how it's important to spend some time reflecting on documentation and to define, even if it's preliminarily, how do you think your research will be documented and registered. So I discussed some FAIR principles, virtual control systems, and tools like Zotero, Tropi, and também data and date, and also date licensing. So how do you choose a license for your database? And here is just a screenshot of the Zotero collection. That is actually it's a bigger project that here in my university we did a few years ago, that is to create a library on digital history. So we will have many collections inside this library, archives, definitions of technology, digital humanities, digital public history, memory, and so on. And I add here the HemDig PT collection, divided into these two databases, Scopus and Web of Science, and it's available in this link here, História Digital, because it's in Portuguese, but it's available in Zotero, and all these references are tagged and organized, and all the metadata in these references are correct, because it was a huge project with students participating as well. So the second phase, that is critique of the collections, is one of the main topics here, because it was very important to me to try to understand these collections. So I choose three main repositories. I will show the three repositories here. But this text is crucial for understanding the biases, limitations, and possibilities of each collection, and for developing consistent methodological strategies and theoretical reflections aligned with technical, political, and theoretical aspects of each repository. So I choose three repositories in Portuguese. I will show these here. The Brazilian digitized newspaper library from Brazilian National Library of Brazil, and the newspaper collection of the National Digital Library of Portugal, and a small one in one library that is changing, because they are publishing a new version of this library, is the municipal newspaper library of Lisbon, which has a smaller collection, but it was important to me to understand as well. So I sought to present the general data of each collection and provide visualizations of this data so that future research can be developed. The general characterization of the digitized collections from these institutions is not currently available in their own search interfaces, which directly affects the research and use of these collections. Therefore, the organized and graphical presentations of these data, as done in this research, is a contribution to research and use of these collections. So here I try to not only organize these informations, but try to generate visualizations and explanations in how these collections are created and how they impact in your research. Here, in this specific topic, I found some problems, because the repositories have different approach in the availability of the data. So the Portuguese case with the National Digital Library of Portugal, we have access to a page called Open Data, and you can download all the information about what is digitized. But in the case of the Brazilian library, we don't have access to this information. So I had to contact the National Library directly and ask for this information. So here I have to thank the employees of National Library that allow me to access this information. And this is another important result in this research, because now we can access this information for the Brazilian library as well. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that to understand these collections, it's very important to understand the results you achieve when you search metadata or keywords in these repositories. But nowadays, through these web pages of these graphical interfaces, we cannot access this information. So the researcher do not know if the research that he made in one of these graphical interfaces online, if he is accessing a collection mainly focused in Lisbon or other city, or which was the chronological frame that its research was done. So here I try to show the chronological, geographical characteristics of these collections. And the third point, it was a very important topic for me as well, is the analysis of the graphical interfaces. So I evaluate these three graphical interfaces, how the user access these collections. And I used a methodology proposed by Ehrman, Burnout, and Dury in 2019, that they developed a comprehensive and detailed survey covering 6 evaluation criteria subdivided into about 140 items. In the original study, the survey was applied to 24 graphical interfaces of historical newspaper collections. And the article, this 2019 article, presented interesting results about the different stages of each of these interfaces, as well as common characteristics and general limitations. However, the research was focused on repositories in Western Europe and the United States, and did not include any collections in Portuguese or Spanish. So given these limitations, I sought to apply the method to the graphical interfaces of historical newspaper collections in Portuguese. Then I translated the survey and adapted the questionnaire and applied it to the graphical interfaces of the selected collections in Portuguese. I found significant similarities in the results, and I will show these on this third topic, that's a comparative effort. It's just some results here, but an in-depth analysis will be published soon in some articles that I'm writing right now. So here's just to present you some of these comparisons that I did between Portuguese case and Brazilian. So the collections presented many similarities, and it was a interesting point for me, because if you look at the Portuguese and the Brazilian collection of digitized newspapers, we find some similar bias. So the geographical bias is evident, because the main part of the collection in Brazil represents journals, newspapers from Rio de Janeiro, and the Portuguese case represents newspapers from Lisbon. And the chronological bias for me was more interesting because in the Brazilian and Portuguese case, we have the same chronological frame in this collection. So both of them are centered in the last decades of the 19th century, with a peak in 1880, and in the first decades of the 20th century. I will show you a graph just to illustrate that. And of course, as we would expect, the language of the collections are almost entirely composed of newspapers in Portuguese. Created from the from the Brazilian collection. And here we can see that this graph represents a number of newspapers in each decade that begins to be published. So the initial publication of one newspaper. And here we have the peak in 1880, and the last decades of the 19th century is the highest amount of newspapers initial publication here. And the Portuguese case was very similar. And other results, important results for me was the analysis of the interface. And we can see that all the main points showed by the original study. It was a study developed by the team of the Impresso project. So they have a huge experience dealing with these challenges from digitized newspapers, right? So we find this almost the same graphical, rather graphic that I will show you. It's almost the same in Portuguese case and the study developed by the Impresso team. So we have here this graph that shows some, as the authors called, high criteria. So we have 6 families here, 6 high criteria elements here. We have connectivity, user content, source criticism, generosity, content search, content filtering. In each of these high criteria here, we have dozens of topics here, like metadata, browsing, APIs, enhancements of results. There's a more than 100 other topics inside of this high criteria level here. And this graph is very similar to the one presented by the original study. So we have a huge importance of source criticism in Portuguese newspaper graphical interfaces of digitized newspaper in Portuguese, because we have many informations on metadata, and we have many options to content search and content filtering. But as shown by the original research, these interfaces lack features and functionalities on connectivity, or the possibility to connect this repository with other repositories and other sources. Lack options of what they call generosity, or the possibility to discover and enhance the results. So we don't have any APIs, for example, in these interfaces, and we don't have access to these informations in these interfaces. And other high criteria element here that was very, very close to zero was the user content management. So we don't have any workspace where the user can tag, save, share, compare the results. So this is very interesting to me, and I'm writing an article about that how these interfaces with these technical characteristics impact in the results, impact on the research, and this is a very important thing to understand. This is very similar to the results that the original article published in 2019. Well, then after all of these, so for me, it's important that before the user, before the researcher starts to collect the data, it's important to do the 2 first phases. That is, prepare yourself, technically speaking, but as well evaluate critically the data, the collections, and the interfaces, and then you begin to data collection. So in this phase, I outlined strategies for data collection and organization of the data and metadata from the studied collections. And it's organized in 3 topics. So first, I not only argument that to report and document all your actions in this research, but I created some small Python scripts that generate search reports, which function, these scripts function as methodological support tools. These scripts record data about the repositories, the search conducted, the criteria used by the researcher, and the results obtained, and generate reports in text, plain text, and in CSV files as well. And in the second topic here, data scrapers, I create three tools to deal with these three different repositories. One of to collect data and generate reports on the criteria used to the search, as well the results obtained. So first, it's a tool that I created a couple of years ago called Py8db. Here is the logo and the link to the documentation. It's a tool written in Python to help researchers that use the Brazilian digital newspaper library. So this tool generates reports on your search, as well collects the data, downloads the image when it's possible, and generates CSV with all these data organized. And I created web scraping tools for the National Digital Library of Portugal and for the Municipal Newspaper Library of Lisbon as well. So all of these tools to collect metadata is available on the website of the research. And the fourth phase, that was a huge challenge for me, because I tried to test and create some tutorials to use optical character recognition tools. And this is a very complicated task, especially from a historian that is not computer science, or I'm just a historian trying to understand these tools. So it was a very hard task for me. And first of all, I listed and explained a couple of programming historian tutorials that help you to use OCR to understand optical character recognition, optical layout recognition. And so I organized it and written some summary of these lessons. And then I organized the phase like that. First, you have to define the strategy which strategy you use to approach our data. So first, I guess that we had to evaluate the volume and the quality of your data to choose if the best option is to use a CLI tool like Tesseract, OCRD, and Kraken, or a graphical user interface tool. And the example that I used here was Image Reader. And we have, as I already said, the programming historian lessons explained as well. So I tested mainly OCRD and Kraken using Tesseract engine and the Image Reader. So my goal here, more than providing a step-by-step guide for using each of these tools, is to present the main features, advantages, and disadvantages, and promote critical reflection on their use. So here we have one of these tables that I created comparing OCRD results. So I tried different engines, and here we can see that the engine Tesseract Portuguese I achieved the best results for these sections here of the image of the newspaper page. So I used a couple of examples to try to show how to use OCRD, Kraken, using the Tesseract agent to do the OCR in these pages. And I use these other software called G-Image Reader, which is an open source software that uses the Tesseract engine as well, and is a graphical user interface that you can select all the layouts. You can recognize the layouts and then apply the optical character recognition. And my conclusion is that if you are using, if your data set is smaller than 1,000, for example, it's better to use the G-Image Reader because you have more control of the process. But if you have data sets larger than 1,000, you probably have to use a CLI tool that has a pipeline that pre-process and then apply OCR tools and then realize the post-processing of these tasks. But at the same time, it is a very difficult task to do, and you have to learn a lot of these OCR tools. And as well, for achieve better results, it's highly recommended that you train a model specifically to your data. And this was not the main objective of this research, but here we have the tutorials and all the explanations how to install and how to execute this basic use of the CLI tools and the GUI tool as well. And the final phase is review, preservation, and publication. Here I discuss how it's important to review and all the documentation, the metadata, and the data structure, and how to publish this research data. So I talk about the Zenodo option or other repositories like GitHub. But it is a phase that it's not only the final one. Actually, I argument that the documentation and the care of this registration of all the activities you do on the research are important throughout the process. So I divided this phase in three: consolidation of the documentation, review of the data and metadata, and data publication. And these I guess with these 5 phases, the researcher can begin from the phase 1 to phase 5 and be able to deal with these very complex and nuanced source that is the digitized newspapers with many layers. And we have to understand not only the contents of the newspaper, but we have to understand the technical and the methodological issues that its use brings to the researcher. So to conclude, I guess that, and this is something that I'm talking about in the last years, the importance of methodological reflections and the demand for technical training in historical research, and the importance of collaborative and interdisciplinary approach. Many of us cannot do this without working side by side with a computer scientist, statistics, and so on. Another point for me that is very important, it's the debate and how to debate and collaborate with archival institutions, that historians need to get close with the archival institutions, the national libraries, the national archives, because we need to collaborate in the construction of these interfaces of the tools that these archivals allow us to access. And of course, I hope that I could support new researches using the sources and codes and all the debates that I have here in this framework. So I guess it was all that I wanted to talk about. And here are some links. The link to the framework, I guess I will click here just to show you the Jupyter notebook. Here is my web page and contacts. It's here, email and etc. So let me show you the HemDig framework here. It's all in Portuguese now. So here we have in the middle all the text and explanation. Here on the left side we have the phases here, and here the structure of the page that you are. So let me show you here the phase 4 in the study of the collections. So I have the explanations, the links to the raw data, and here we have all the codes that I used. So you can run these codes through this page because it's a Jupyter book. So if you click here on this one of these buttons here, that is, you can run these codes with Binder, for example. So here we have all the code that I used and the data that I analyzed here, and the graphs as well, interactive graphs. So here we have, for example, the language of the newspapers. So we have here in Portuguese, it's 6,400 and not identified, and other languages here. And we have, for example, the periodicity, the newspaper that was weekly, monthly. So we can see all the information here. Our place of publication, we have here Rio de Janeiro as the main city in these collections. So this is very important to know if you are a user that are researching in this collection. So you should know that the collection is mainly focused on Rio de Janeiro. So this will impact in the results that you will receive, right? So here are all these information, and you can download this notebook here, or download as PDF as well, and everything is here as well. The tutorials for OCR and CLI tools or GUI tools, and final considerations, bibliographic reference, and so on. And just to finish, here we have the scrappers as well. So here I explain what the PyXB tool does. Here I have an example of the CSV that it returns to the user. But here I created a scrapper for the Digital Library of Portugal as well. This scrapper did not download the newspaper pages, but it downloads and organizes the metadata, the list of results with the links, so you can return and replicate these searches. And it's here you can execute these from this Jupyter book. You even doesn't need to download it if you don't want it. And I created a scrapper for the Hemeroteca Digital de Lisboa as well, and some reports and documentation tools as well. So you can generate reports like that just running some scripts that are available at this page. So general data and repository name, URL, date, hour, name of the user, and so on. So I guess it's and I hope that we can discuss a little bit. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Eric. It was a pleasure to hear about your work and what you have done here with the Portuguese sources from Hemeroteca. And now we can debate and make some questions to the presenter regarding his work and his workflow. Hi, James.
Hey. Sorry, I've just been struggling with Zoom. I've done all manner of updates when we started, so I'm just trying to figure out all the new buttons. Everything's been moved about for me, so you'll have to forgive me. No, thank you, Eric. That was very interesting. I say I'm a huge fan. I'm very interested. I'm a huge fan of the current the current movement to really focus on documentation, where a lot of the projects, where in the past, a lot of the previous ones, it's sort of been brushed under the carpet, but now documenting every single decision made and how that could have impacted metadata choice and how that in turn goes on to potentially influence what sort of research can be done. That's quickly coming to the forefront, because I mean that is the focus of my research project's forthcoming article, where we methodically and meticulously tracked every single decision we made. We've got a Bible which is just ridiculously huge. So trying to condense that into something that's actually logical and followable in order to provide guidelines. Yes, it's fascinating to see that this seems to be becoming a major aspect of research, and yeah, I fully support it. So I was very pleased to see what you've done. And when you were mentioning about the OCR with the Tesseract, were you using Isabelle Gribamont's guides perchance with Tesseract? She was my
Sorry, actually I used the Tesseract inside of OCRD. The Tesseract was used as the engine of the OCRD and Craigie.
Of course. But it was just because my predecessor on my project was Isabella Gribamont, and she does a lot of work with Tesseract and trying to combine it with Google Vision, the API and things. So I know she's quite a big player on that scene. But no, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Two things. First of all, we have a lesson in programming historian using exactly these Google Visions and OCR and Tesseract combined, right? And
yes, that's it. Isabel, she authored that.
Yeah, and it's translation in the process of translation for Portuguese now. So yeah. And for the first part of your comment, I'm the crazy guy of the documentation now in Brazil. So I'm the boring guy that always asks people, oh, and what about the documentation? What about the... So for me, it's a huge part of our research now, right? So we need to be able to understand all the process, to be able to replicate, to analyze the results of the research. So now we receive many journal articles to review, to peer review. And in Brazil, I think it's a common thing, not only in Brazil, but the space for the methodological reflection, it's very short now. So I guess that the digital history is contributing to enlarge the part of the debate on the methodological aspects of the research, because I guess that nowadays it's impossible to build an argument to
I think he was frozen.
of this research. So I'm agree with you 100%.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in terms of tracking any decision, sorry, I'll shut up in just a moment. But if you've got any level of standardization or changing metadata from trying to bring disparate data sets together, every single decision counts. It can have such a knock-on effect. But yeah.
Yes, for example, in Portugal nowadays, if you apply for funding, it is almost mandatory for you to have a data management plan and to document everything that you are doing. And I also have a question. So you documented everything, you have all the codes online. Do you know if any researcher or anyone, even from another country, a non-speaking Portuguese one, used it and applied it?
Well, for me, it's hard to know that, but I guess that not yet, because I finished this research in the last month of 2023, and just now I'm having the opportunity to show these, to talk about, and I still writing some articles about it with these results. So I guess that this year or next year, I hope that people will start to use it. That's one of the things that I trying to present in my classes with my students the importance of the debates on these methodological aspects. So I hope that people use it. Everything I do, I research, I try to put in a very openly licensed so people can use and share. Especially because I'm a professor at a federal university, so I'm a employee of the federal government. My payments is from the national, the federal government. So for me, it's almost mandatory in my perception to put it in the openly licensed if possible. So I hope people use it. I started to write about it, and in this year I had some events that I attended in Brazil and talking about it. So I hope that people are using more and not only using the code, but using the data that the National Library of Brazil made available for me, because it's not that you can access through the own web page.
I don't know if you have any more questions.
No, not really. I'm afraid I've got to go in a couple of minutes because I've got the next meeting. But I probably should have introduced myself properly. I work at the University of Liverpool in the UK on the Digital Library of Human Remains. I know it sounds fascinating. It is. No, it is a lot of fun. But I imagine, like your data sets, we had to bring together we had to scrape from so many different sources and bring them together. So I'm really fascinated. I'm going to go through your thing with Google Translate to get an English version.
Yeah.
If
I have some time, I'll try to translate it for English, because it's important to open the debates with other countries. So thank you very much for your comments.
I'm certainly going to be sharing it with my colleagues, because you've given me some ideas, especially with the way that you've implemented the live code that can be shared, that can be run from the browser. I like that a lot. Yeah. So we have to build off one another. That's the only way we can go forward. So yeah, I look forward to seeing more.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I have just one more question. So,
okay,
you implemented the workflow and the code on your postdoc, but it has an institutional perspective. So it can also be used by GLAM institutions, for example, by the libraries that you had the sources from. Do you think they will be open enough to use the code? And do you think that they have know-how enough to use it? Or will they need to have a technological or a digital humanities tutoring to be able to apply, because it's coding, and of course probably they are not used to it? So how did you manage that part on your workflow, not on the perspective of your research, but of the impact that it might have on the institution?
That's a tricky question.
Sorry.
but that's a thing that it's important to me. So from the last 5 years or so, I'm in contact with the Brazilian National Library, so they are open to debate this. There's some areas because the British library, the Brazilian library, and the Portuguese library are huge institutions. So they have many sections there with multiple projects, and the digitized newspaper is just one small part of these huge institutions. In this specific area, it has been very open to debates with us. So in 2020, I guess, 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, I was invited to participate in events hosted by the National Library of Brazil, and I presented my previous tool. It's called PyHCB, and they one of their main directors of this area in the National Library told that he asked to all the members of this area to read the paper and to debate. And this year I went to National Library in another event, and they came to talk to me, and they are very open now. I guess that the political change in Brazil and the political environment now, that they are more open to debate with universities. So they are now debating the development of an API, implementation of IIIF. So in the case of Brazilian National Library, that I know more than the Portuguese case, I guess they are open, and they have a team of programmers working there. So I hope that we can work together more closely, but I guess it's happening. There's new workers there that wants to build these bridges with academics, the society as a whole. So I hope that we can establish more direct connection. One example was that they sent me XML file with the whole data set of digitized newspaper library. So I asked if it was possible for me to make it available for everyone, the public available, and they said that was a public file, so I could use and share. And I'm writing right now a paper about these data. So I guess that it's a way that we can establish more connections with these archival institutions. And the National Archive in Brazil has a historian as president now. So I guess in the Brazilian case, I don't know in Portuguese, I'm not in Portugal, I don't have these informations, but in Brazil, I guess that we have more now a political scenario that makes possible to get closer with these institutional archives.
That's great.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, maybe we can close the session. Thank you very much, Eric, for your presentation. It was really good to hear about it and to learn a little bit more. And thank you.
Thank you very much. For me, was great to organize all this information, because it was the first time that I talk about all the framework. So for me, it was a challenge to put all these. I hope that was organized and clear for you. So thank you very much. I hope to see you soon.